Hello, I'm Asif Farouk of Finextra, and today I'm with Arjun Hassard of Myriada. So Arjun, thank you for joining me today.
Very welcome.
What is the difference between collective wisdom and noise?
I think it's worth defining what we mean by noise. It's, in this context, unstructured data that's meaningless in some way, so it can't be interpreted by a machine or computer. I think that the main difference between collective wisdom and noise is the manner by which you interpret that wisdom and process it. There's collective wisdom all over the place, on Twitter, pricing, financial instruments, open source software, our democratic process. But a lot of it wafts away, a lot of it is lost and turns into noise. Even a traditional meeting could be described as collective wisdom. You're assembling people in a room, getting multiple views in order to solve a problem or maybe predict something. One of the problems is that when those views are aired in a meeting, it's very unstructured, so people are speaking qualitatively, and once they're out there, the way they're actually combined is very unsystematic. So usually the aggregator in this sense would be the boss or the person in charge.
Yeah.
So you're combining unstructured data in an unsystematic way, and the worst aspect of this is that what tends to happen in any traditional business meeting format is that the way dominant personalities tend to influence individual views means that you get herding around a certain view, especially when something is uncertain. So imagine you were predicting the oil price or something. You know, that would be a group of analysts sitting there trying to guess where it's going to go. In uncertain times like we are now with oil, people have a tendency to herd around a dominant view because there's safety in numbers. So basically you have this situation which I would describe as on the noisy end of the collective wisdom spectrum. So you have useful on one end, noisy on the other end. The way meetings work right now, something so basic, something that happens in every organization, is very, very noisy. And the thing I find really fascinating about this is that the meeting has hardly changed in the last 50 years. So we've had information technology and dawn of information age, and the meeting has sort of emerged unscathed from all these other business processes changing. I almost think it should be called like it's almost holy or unchangeable, like a conclave or something, rather than a meeting. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is because the meeting is a very good example of the difference between collective wisdom that's meaningful and collective wisdom that's noisy. There's so many ways you can improve it. You can use quantitative data, so create quantitative data streams. You can silo people in advance of the meeting so that they're actually independent. You can aggregate them in an organized way. And you can use an algorithm to weight them better and use machine learning to improve the algorithm. And you can have rapid feedback loops in order to test hypotheses. All of these things improve the output. And all of those things will drag you towards the useful end of that collective wisdom spectrum. As it happens, of course, that's what Myriada does. That's what we do. And from the user perspective, they're just playing with an app.
So the merits of collective wisdom are well known. But what are the challenges in the logistics behind getting all these decision makers all together at the same time?
Well, they're immense, actually. The impediments to practically implementing collective wisdom are very significant. One of the main ones is mobilizing people to actually provide that information. Now, it's solved to some extent when it's their job or it's in the curriculum or it's within their remit to do so. People aren't going to use Myriada primarily because it's fun. They're going to use it because the output to the organization that they're part of is extremely valuable. It's fun too. But in most cases, actually, logistical problems are good for us because they allow a technological solution to ease the process. Let me give you an example. Again, you have those 20 analysts, but let's say they're scattered around the world. And that would mean currently for them to actually aggregate their views and extract some meaning from it is very difficult because it's qualitative, it's not timed, they're not producing those views simultaneously. So that's where we can step in with a technological solution, a platform, and actually make that process far more frictionless and actually unlock a lot of new processes that didn't exist. I would say finally, a lot of the impediments to what we're trying to do are logistical but born out of cultural problems. What I mean by that is many of the processes that exist today are centered around individual ability rather than group ability. We have a very strong we have very strong faith in the individual to solve problems as opposed to the group. So what we're trying to engender here is expertise and strategy and forecasting and even intelligence as a plural thing rather than a singular. I think a common assumption about what we do is that our problem is that we're trying to convince people that the crowd is better than them. That's actually a very superficial problem. I don't even use the word crowd. We're working with specialized groups, small ones, sometimes up to just 10. I think it's more that there's a deeply ingrained faith in the individual ability, and that's resulted in more work for us in terms of building these group processes from scratch, as it were.
How does collective forecasting manage events which are unexpected? I think a good example right now is Bitcoin. The slump is quite unexpected. So how does collective forecast manage that, if it can at all?
I think it's really important that collective forecasting is not misconstrued as some sort of oracle. Like, this isn't Minority Report. Collective forecasting doesn't predict externalities, black swans, Icelandic volcanoes, but then no one does. Where it can be very useful is in reacting to those events, both faster and with greater insight. So in some of the tests we ran, the ability of the group to notice after a trend in a security price was inflecting, was much better than the ability of the individuals that made up that group. So they could spot that there was going to be a sort of change in momentum. I think when you're talking about freak incidents, it's even more valuable to harness the group ability. And the reason for that is when you have a capitulation or a sell-off or panic, it's very emotional. And that's where you want groups to predict human behavior and that irrationality. It's more useful than perhaps in the context of fundamental analysis, or where you're trying to predict using business cycle factors, like, for example, predicting the EPS of a company. There, the information is more restricted. So, you want to be mobilizing people to predict sentiment-driven things, and not so much mobilizing them to predict things where information is restricted. Like, you would never predict 9/11 because obviously the information for that event was highly, highly restricted in advance. So. Just on Bitcoin really quickly, we are launching a crypto group, so about 100 experts on Bitcoin who will be predicting it. The only thing I would assure you is that it's far better to be part of that group, contributing and receiving back that information, than trying to generate alpha on the Bitcoin rate by yourself. So it's the delta, right? It's the relative gain that you get from aggregating your views with others.